Salam, everyone. Welcome to the Muslim Street. This is your host, Hina Lotus. I was just super excited for this episode today. We have, of course, my co-host, Malik Aziz. We also have, wanted to shout out Lance Curve, of course, for, doing all the technology and production. We really appreciate him. And we wanted to also introduce our special guest. We have Yaya Shabazz, super well-informed, super, amazing brother who is well informed about the episode that we're doing today for Dr. Khalid Muhammad. If you wanted to introduce yourself, we'd love to hear all about you.
Yes. Assalamu alaikum to my fellow hosts, as
Islam.
well as the listening audience. Um, Brother Malik, I want to commend you for the journey you have taken since the inception of the idea of the Muslim Street. He and I have had many discussions. I mean, going back years. This is years in the making, and projections as far as where he would like to take this platform in the future. And even though we haven't engaged hands-on on this in some time, in spirit, I've always been with him. And I've always been like a co-visionary with him in words, seeing where this could go, where this could be, especially in this day and time with what we have in the present dispensation of where we are in time, looking at it from both a spiritual as well as a temporal perspective. Given that there's not a day or week or month that goes by in the Muslim Ummah globally where something of great import is taking place that impacts the entire globe, existence, our existential condition worldwide dictates that the same fervor that was exhibited during the time of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, as well as in the various revivals and reforms and movements we've had over the last going on 1,500 years. This time is dictating that same fervor be kindled and I should say reignited and strengthened, because the opposition, which represents this world order, which is on the way out, they're circling the wagon seriously. And, like a cornered dog, is very dangerous. And we cannot afford it in this hour to go to sleep on our posts, wherever we are in the world. Whatever strain or expression of Islam we manifest where we are, we're one ummah, okay? And in particular, which brings me to the subject of our today's discussion, remembering our brother, Dr. Khalid Abdul Muhammad. He was a man born from this time. And when I look back, I see for this time, excuse me. And when I look back at his early life, from what I know of his early life and his journey from Houston, Texas, where he was born, and his early education, later education and development, meant his nurturing, his finding Islam through the teachings of the most honorable Elijah Muhammad, through his representatives, namely the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan in the late 60s, that formed the incubation, his Muslim incubation, that kickstarted his development from the late 60s all the way onto his departure from us. So from a personal perspective, from my vantage point, I mean, each and every one of us who knew our brother, we have a Khalid Abdul Muhammad story.
Yeah.
It reminds me of those of us who knew Muhammad Ali personally, which I did, and my father and my family did. But everyone has a Muhammad Ali story, because his impact was indeed global. His presence was global. But Dr. Khalid Abdul Muhammad, each and every one of us who were honored and blessed to labor with him inside of the Nation of Islam, outside of the Nation of Islam, in various Black liberation movements here. We all have a story. We all have a principle, an anecdote, an axiom, something that we derived from our interaction with him, from our listening to him, from our observing his movements and how he um, executed his calling. We all derived, and have benefited in many ways from his example. Just comes to what comes to mind when I look at him in his short life, and his earthly life was very short. He passed away from us at the age of 53, and it just strikes me. I'll be 63 next month. Okay, and I found myself like, wow, this brother accomplished so much in 53 years of his life. Okay, and it kind of makes me feel cheap, because in 53 years he was able to compress, I would say, 100 lifetimes in that 53 years. And I compare him with the lifespan of, say, Minister Malcolm X, okay, who was sort of a predecessor of Dr. Khalid Abdul Muhammad, as was Minister Farrakhan. And I look at Dr. Martin Luther King, and I look at Bob Marley, and I look at a whole host of revolutionaries across Africa, Asia, Latin America, the Caribbean, here in North America. And, the saying is that the good die young. Well, there's a point to that. Okay. Um, they were definitely numero uno on the enemy's hit parade. And however their demise, whether there was an open assassin, the obvious assassination, or whether it was assassination by other means that were not so obvious, um, it is the common sentiment among those who loved and honored Dr. Khalid that he left us too soon, and that his day today, what we're going through today, since he's in the 23 or 4 years that he's been gone from us, that this was his day, meaning his spirit, okay, was created, was made for this time.
Yeah.
Because this is sorely absent among our people. Um, Not saying that, one man, no woman defines a movement. I mean, God is greater than that. But when you have someone of his caliber, his type, and those of us who know him, I think you get what I'm saying. Who knew him, you really get what I'm saying. He was absolutely irreplaceable. Um, but Allah's the best knower, and there will be many Dr. Khalids, just as there will be many Malcolms, there'll be many Farrakhan's, there'll be any of our heroes, our leaders who stood up on the battlefield and either with words or through the force of arms, um, confronted and met this enemy on the battlefield of ideas, the battlefield, um, you know, the actual battlefield, okay? Um, that work is not in vain. It is not in vain, and it will bear fruit.
Yeah.
Because each and every one who received that word, it germinated in them. Okay?
That's a great point.
There are people, adults now, adults walking around now, young adults who were not born when he passed away. But their parents were, and their parents heard. Their parents were involved. Okay. And now they're coming up with a spirit, a different type of spirit than the generation before, because a spiritual man, as I was taught, a spiritual leader, whether it's on the caliber of our Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, or whether it's any of our divine men who come since, when they speak, whether it's a revolutionary, someone who comes up out of the people's longing for um, someone, some soul to be born, some great soul to come into the world, when that one reaches the plateau, the pinnacle of their mission and the purpose from which they were born, they're not just speaking to the present generation, their contemporaries. They're speaking from the realm of the ancestors. We say we're speaking through them. And they're also speaking into the generations yet to be born.
That's a great point, Brother Shabazz.
So in their person, that's my last point. In their person, they embody the spirit of our resistance, the spirit of our will to live, as the saying goes, self-preservation is the first law of nature. Well, collectively, self-preservation is the first law of nature. And we give birth through the law of birth and the law of dissatisfaction. We give birth to Dr. Khalid Abdul Muhammad's, and there will be more of him to come.
Yeah. So Brother Shabazz pointed out.
Yes,
yeah, Brother Shabazz pointed out to the audience that the context of Dr. Khalid, right? We're going to play him in his own words and kind of discuss a little bit about an interview that he did and on a Donahue show. But we're here to celebrate the coming up on the death of Dr. Khalid Muhammad, which will be tomorrow. It'll be 24 years. Can't believe those who knew him, those who worked with him, those who felt his spirit. 24 years. That's an entire generation that has grown up only seeing Dr. Khalid YouTube videos and this kind of projection away from what we saw, because we understood what that PhD on the front of his name was. I mean, sitting down in a circle, he was an academic. So Lance, go to stop one. And this will be the Donahue show. Dr. Khalid debating Phil Donahue back in the 90s.
Entertainer to Black people. I'm so glad you asked that question. I believe that the liberation and salvation of the Black nation must be brought about after our 506,000 year Holocaust, where we have lost over 600 million. And so I believe that really give information, but Black people are a people of rhythm and spirit. So I also give inspiration. From your
Yeah, Brother Lance, look at, we got some technical difficulties. Let's go to SOP 2 and continue the words, Dr. Khalid Muhammad in his own words.
Okay. Just give me a moment.
I'll be very clear here, Phil. Nelson Mandela is my brother. So he is a member of the family, and so is Jesse, and Jesse is a very and by the enemy, the oppressor against his people. Now back to Brother Nelson Mandela, and certainly we can never mention Nelson without mentioning Mandela's attempt at a multiracial government in South Africa after the murder of men, women, children, and babies, and the rape of colony that has been established like Israel there in that part of the world. I cannot go along with one man, one vote. Let me say why. If someone broke into your home, Mr. Donnie, your home, and Black Boots stomped your door down and came in and robbed and raped everyone in the household, and was able to take the wealth of your home and parlay. This is an intruder. This is a murderer. This is a burglar. This is a criminal. So you have no responsibility to share your home with them after they broke in.
So we got some technical difficulties coming out of Accra with the engineering team. Lance, maybe you can check that out. However, back to Hina and Brother Shabazz. Brother Shabazz, as we saw Dr. Khalid Muhammad, engaging, Phil Donahue from a historical perspective. He was cross-disciplinary. He had an understanding of geopolitics. He had an understanding of geography as it relates to anthropology and in the context of that history. And as you saw, he was very political too. I mean, he talked about the Palestinian struggle. I mean, how significant was that? I wish we could have saw the whole clip and how he, put that in the context of the Black liberation struggle, and that they married to each other. Brother Shabazz, can before Hina jumps in with a couple of questions for you, can you kind of address Dr. Khalid in that framework that I just kind of outlined?
Yes, sir. What anyone who would have seen that episode, who have ever viewed and studied that episode, would have had I would say it was a synopsis, a brief, concise synopsis or summarization of the scope, okay, and breadth of what this brother represented and the level, the depth of his qualifications and his foundation. Many times our leadership tends to be one-sided. They would either be religious or spiritual, and others will be political, others will be more cultural, okay, and others will be more into the pop sociological aspect of things. But with Brother Khalid, what you saw was an exquisite blend, perfectly proportioned blend, okay, and a deadly effective blend, I should say, of all of those aspects of his being, of his consciousness, that was integrated into an approach that appealed to not just a broad section of, say, Black America, but Black people globally and people of color globally, okay? Even though he was centered, his attention, his core audience were those out of who he arose, which is the Black nation of North America. In my interaction with him and seeing him speak at universities and speak at community events and speak, say, in on television shows and whatnot, what I saw was that every oppressed human being on this planet, okay, when I say every, I mean every, Black, brown, yellow, red, and even some whites, actually plugged in, identified with, empathized with, and supported him in his expressions and his stand on behalf of our people. And the way he tied in the struggle of, say, South Africa and Palestine and anywhere in the Caribbean and North America, South America, and Asia, and the way he can just fluently tie that in a digestible form that his audience could internalize, okay, and make use of, was something that was unique to Dr. Khalid in his way. I mean, as we all know, he was basically a disciple of the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan, who in turn was a disciple of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. And his predecessors, one of his predecessors, of course, is Minister Malcolm X. And you can see that progression, okay? You can see that progression and how he was able to develop that approach, because all of those ingredients, and he wasn't one to let sectarianism divide him from, say, the Christian population, Black Christian population, or even the Black Sunni Muslim population. He was able to relate, okay, regardless of what path, what ideological school of thought you subscribe to. He was able to reach you and speak the language, okay, of your school of thought, of your sect or whatever schism or color on the spectrum that you belong and identify with. He was able to relate. I mean, I would see this in question and answer periods where he would actually be challenged by any one of the above from any one quarter of the population. And he handled himself. He was able to without blinking, able to articulate his position and defend it very, very strongly and vigorously, and pretty much win over those who would challenge him. So I would, he was a true revolutionary in that sense. Okay. And like we said, he's been gone from us now 23, 24 years now this month. And, you know, who knows where he would have been, where his consciousness, where he would have grown to, what he would have grown into by this time. Okay. Had he still been among us. I hope that answered your question.
Yeah. Great. Hina, and please.
Oh, say that one more time. I apologize.
Yeah. Did you have a question for the guest?
You know, I really do, because I feel like as the Muslim Street has been growing, especially since our hard launch, we've had a multitude of different personalities on from all different backgrounds. We've talked about the sanctions in Iran. We've talked to Radio Watermelon, who, you know, are raising funds for people in Gaza. We talked to a Palestinian foreign policy analyst. And I mean, that's a very tiny list. And, you know, of course, we've talked a multitude of times about Malcolm X and Black liberation as well. And one thing that I hear repeatedly when it comes to like intellectual revolutionary discourse per se is, you know, we won't be able to rise or have a new left or have a revolution until we have another Malcolm X or until we have another, you know, intellectual of that caliber. I think a lot of people are waiting for someone to rise. If you had any sort of advice for people, how can we find that within ourselves, you know, following the legacy of Dr. Khalid, you know, and other revolutionaries? How can we find that within ourselves as opposed to waiting for someone else? I know it's a very big question to start off on, but I think it's just a very necessary conversation for the Ummah.
Brother Malik, you want to go first?
Yeah, you know, I think, here's what I say, and if Dr. Khalid was sit here right here next to us today, he'll argue me down on this point. I once heard him give a lecture in Chicago, and he in front of thousands of people, and they were hanging from the rafters, and that topic was the man and the movement. Is specifically what you're talking about, Hina. And he historically, vis-a-vis the 20th century, built the case from Marcus Garvey all the way through Malcolm X and Minister Louis Farrakhan, how there's always been a man at the middle of that movement, right? There's always been the one who could call the masses out. And we saw others. We saw Dr. King. We saw Chairman Fred Hampton of the Illinois chapter of the Black Panther Party. We saw Medgar Evers, who got assassinated in 1963. There was Kwame Ture. There's always been this build around a mass movement. What he would argue with me today is that at this point, I think in our juncture, because of the strength and the overall mass of white supremacy, I think that as we saw white supremacy on its heels for the last 500 years, established its hegemony, has done that through innovation, right? From the agrarian revolution, there was an innovation that made a transition smoothly into the Industrial Revolution. That innovation was the cotton gin, right? In the beginning of the 19th century. Then we move from the Industrial Revolution into the first phase of the technological revolution. And now we sit in the second phase of that technological revolution. Still, white hegemony sits at the top of that bar. Everybody else falls in place to the bottom. We're on the bottom, right? I maintain that the seeds of all of these man in the middle of the movements and building these mass movements, at some point, the seeds have to germinate. And the germination is for the mass takeover. And that is through the next innovation. We have to own the next innovation. And when we own the next innovation, it will be the end of the empire. So that's my take on it. And Dr. Khalid would argue me right now, and he probably will win that argument because, he was multifaceted in so many different ways, including charisma. I mean, he literally, had the art and science of taking someone, breaking them down, right, to the lowest common denominator, instead of leaving them there, and then he will build you back up at the end and make you part and parcel as he sought out your thoughts and your input on the liberation struggle. And that's what made him fascinating as a leader.
Very well put. And I want to piggyback. I want to segue from what he's the last point that he made, sister, to answer your question in reference to this. If I want to make up a term, singularity, in terms of there's always this charismatic drum major, as Dr. King would put it, drum major figure that it seems that the masses are waiting on before we can coalesce and resume our momentum forward toward our inevitable liberation, okay, and freedom. Brother Malik and I have this discussion from time to time about the institutionalization of leadership. And that takes place through transitional leadership, transitioning from the charismatic singular leader of that time and translating that, okay, through innovative means, for example, of organizing, mobilizing, organizing, training, education, wash, rinse, and repeat. Okay. Until we master that process, and there have been many attempts to do such, and there are many efforts underway in various quarters of our community to do such, where we rely less. I mean, I believe there's a role for the charismatic leadership. I don't totally discount its importance, but at some point, we have to wean away from that in our development and be able to exercise our power in a more institutional way, because power is expressed through institutions. So we have to institutionalize the teachings, the programs, the ideas, okay, and not be afraid to innovate or to discard that which is no longer of use, and to take on new ideas or new means and methods that we find useful for the time that we're moving into. So whether that be here in North America, whether that be anywhere in the Western Hemisphere, in Africa, in the West, so-called Middle East, in Asia, any people that are looking, again, to be at the vanguard of displacing and removing this European and white supremacist hegemony that has blanketed the earth and dominated the earth for the last, especially for the last 5,000 years. If we're going, 500 years, if we're going to ensure that our future generations, benefit, from those efforts that our pioneers then and now, and the seeds that they've planted then and now, if they're going to bear fruit in the future generations to come, then it is a must that we translate the examples of our leaders, such as Dr. Khalid Abdul Muhammad, and translate that into means and methods and institutionalize it, so that we pass off the scene. It is in continual motion, and it continues to bear fruit and manifest that which is intended to manifest. So I don't know if I answered your question. I tend to go off in tangents sometimes, but I hope I address the core of what you're saying. If not, I'll be more than happy to go further in terms of how it relates and some of the lessons that I learned that I gleaned from my experience with Dr. Khalid.
Yeah, we're at the top of the hour. You're listening to the Muslim Street. You can find us at www.themuslimstreet.com across all platforms. Twitter, formerly Twitter X. You can find us there at the Muslim Street. Also, YouTube, like and share. I want to get the word out. We also want to announce starting next week, we'll be introduced to a new sponsor of the show, G2 Global, which is a G2 Global Network, which is a domestic U.S.-based organization that's core business is funding. Also, a great program around solar. One of the announcements that I want to make, and Lance, if you can put that number up across the screen at G2 Global, for the first 100 people, only, you'll be able to, if you get solar on your residential property, and the solar panels are free installation, doesn't cost you anything. All you have to do is sign up. They will come out and they will install it. They will also give you an analysis or proposal on your current bill, a 1 month bill, as part of that consultation process. And they will guarantee your savings of somewhere around 30%. 30% off your bill. But here's the kicker. The first 100 people that text to 813-928-7307 upon installation and implementation of the free solar panels on your home, you will get $1,000 wired to your bank account. That's it, $1,000. I know a lot of people can use the $1,000. Also, you can use a reduction of 30% on your energy bill. So, Hina, great question. One of the things, Brother Shabazz, that I want to ask you about,
Sure.
what is absent today, and largely due to social media, and I'll preface that by quoting the late, great Dr. Conrad Worrell, who was the chairman emeritus of the National Black United Front a couple of years before his death. He said to me over breakfast in a very sad voice, he being a scholar and a revolutionary, right? And that important dynamic that Dr. Khalid had, a scholar and a revolutionary, an academic and a revolutionary, right? He said to me, Dr. Worrell, that I'm afraid that because of social media, that it has ushered into an era of anti-intellectualism and anti-academia that's going to hurt our movement. Now, one of the things that we talked about further during that breakfast meeting was organizing. Dr. Khalid was a sincere and a clear organizer, and the importance of the organizing in the National Black United Front under Dr. Worrell, Dr. Obetashaka, who was the key organizer in the movement, even wrote books on that, block by block organizing. Can you talk to us, Brother Shabazz, about some of your intimate, anecdotal meetings with Dr. Khalid, conversations, actual events that went on around organizing and the importance of that to the movement?
You said a mouthful and you gave me a load. I'm going to pick and choose, but there's so much. I could be here for hours. But what comes to mind, and having met Dr. Conrad Worrell through you here in Miami at one of our workshops that he organized under the National Black United Front. Of course, I have been reading him in his columns in the Final Call newspaper and other publications, and as well as academic papers. So I was familiar with him, but I met him here in Miami. So the democratization of information, as is put through the advent of the internet, has its plus and its minuses, has its pros and cons, has its upsides and its downsides. I would concur with Dr. Worrell in his concern that social media would tend to dissipate the energies of the people, because it's almost like it functions both as a as a release pressure valve, a safety valve, as well as a monitoring entity. And what happens is that a lot of us who would formerly have been out in the streets organizing and in the communities doing that traditional, organic, human, person-to-person organizing have substituted digital, their digital presence with such. And something definitely is lost, when you rely too much on technology. Because what happens is that dynamic interaction, that energetic interaction is very important between an organizer, a revolutionary who is seeking to build and spread the revolution, to mobilize, organize, train, tends to be short-circuited, is in my observation. Because during the time we worked with Dr. Khalid, I first logged online, I think it was February of 1997. That was my entry into the world of the internet, going online, okay? Because the internet, of course, at that point, publicly was very new. So our experience with Dr. Khalid predated the internet. So I think about that because I sometimes while you were talking, I was thinking about how, when we, for example, let me give an example, just organizing events, speaking events, for example, from the late 70s into the 80s and 90s, from working with Minister Louis Farrakhan, Minister Louis Farrakhan, and then working with Dr. Khalid later, our main primary methods of promoting, say, a speaking event, okay, or a rally was what? Printing flyers, putting up posters, going door to door in both the residential and community commercial districts of whatever metro area we're working in, on the college campuses, right? And on the radio at the time. Those were our primary, and those who had access to local cable at the time and would put a cable advertisement, but mainly those were the means and methods by which we generated and our audiences and our crowds. And we were very successful in we were drawing tens of thousands, okay, of people to our meetings. So now, 1995, 96, I last worked with Dr. Khalid in 1996, I think mid to end of 1996. And from that point, he had morphed or transitioned into the new Black Panther Party. And he was also a member of some other groups, but that was the main group he was affiliated with at the time of his demise. So at that time, I was not active with him, but I was in contact with him irregularly, okay? Now, what Dr. Conrad Worrell foresaw, okay, what he saw, I believe, was not so much it being to our detriment, but it would take great effort to maintain the same level of fervor we had before, because that's very important. When you're dealing with people, you're dealing with energy, and when you're dealing with energy on a mass level, and Dr. Khalid, of course, having majored, I think he got his PhD in behavioral mass psychology, or mass behavioral psychology. That was one of his main, I don't know if that was his thesis or whatever, but he was a master, absolute master at that. So, but it requires the human, yes, social media has its role, internet has its role, but it's very important to have that person to person, that physical interaction with the people you're organizing, with the masses. So, when I look at how we moved and operated here in South Florida during the time he was coming, during that year and a half to 2 years he was here, coming back and forth from March of, I think it was, he came down in 1993 for an event that my father and Brother Ron and some other people organized. And then the Black Student Union of Florida International University on March 17th, 1995, hosted Dr. Khalid. And I just recall the energy that was in the air and the controversy and the news coverage. And of course, the Jewish students were organizing and going at him and creating, and all of this was stirring up, okay, to a point where we had, I mean, just almost an overflow crowd here at FIU. And just observing him in action, because I was working security at that point with him, and just observing his interaction with the audience at that time. And the context of that was what was going on in the country with, I think, the O.J. Simpson trial. We were on the back end of that. The Million Man March was coming up later that year, so the momentum was being built up with that. And let's see, I think Bill Clinton was in office at that time, so a whole lot was going on at the time, and there were a lot of the Black consciousness movement, the cultural nationalists and the political nationalists and the left, you know, were also very active and surging in the communities on various levels, depending on the. So that context, okay. I think there was a saying, I'm not sure if it was Mao or Ho Chi Minh mentioned using the analogy of a fish. You know, the people represent the water and the fish represents the revolutionary. And in order for the fish to swim effectively, must, you know, navigate the waters, which represent the people. So in this context, the people, the masses, they were the surging waters through which a revolutionary, a spark of revolution like Dr. Khalid moved through and grew from, as well as fed. So in this sense, his charisma, his personal charisma, and his um, intellectual capacities both served the purpose of raising the consciousness of the people. You know, and I don't care what anyone says. I saw him up because this was a man of the people. Okay. I think you may remember Minister Farrakhan saying publicly on one event, I think we're 1994, about how he would observe Dr. Khalid sit on the stoop. He would be in the rundown part of town, and he would just get out and sit with, say, a wino, okay, or a drug addict, and just sit down next to him, talk to him. Well, we saw that. I saw that with my own eyes, okay, when he was here. And you can see I'm getting a little passionate about it because it really moved me at the time. Like, okay, it's one thing to be in a photo op and do it just for the cameras, okay, but he would spontaneously see certain things as he was moving through the community and stop. I want to get out. And he'll get out and he'll engage. I mean, someone who everyone else would overlook. He'll just engage the people, you know, hug them up, speak to them, and sit there and talk and just exchange. And I'm looking at the look in their eyes because they recognize him, you know, from television, because he was very controversial at the time in the news. The clip he just played with the Donahue show and a few other noteworthy things that were taking place, noteworthy events that were taking place in that time. So he was kind of, you know, out there, you know, and hot. So when they saw him jump out of a car, and we're in a section of Miami called Overtown, okay? And Overtown is the historically Black district in Miami, okay? The part of Miami that the tourists hardly see, okay? Along with Coconut Grove and a few other people's places, locations. But we'll stop the car, and he'll get out and start pressing the flesh and talking. And there, after they get over the shock of seeing him, and they recognize who he was. I mean, he didn't have, say, maybe the fame of a Muhammad Ali, but they knew who he was when he got out of the car. Okay. And he would sit down, he would go into the various tenements, into the apartments, and sit down with them. They offered him something to drink, he would drink with them. And my father in particular was very concerned about that. He said, brother, he said, I grew up in a place like this. I'm from a place like this. Okay. We were down in Homestead, which is South Miami-Dade County, an agricultural town. And he was there for a brother who had gotten killed. One of the young brothers who was securing him had gotten killed in a something street matter. But he was down there visiting families. And you've been to Belle Glade right here in Central Florida, Brother Malik. So just Homestead is like that, okay? And he's just, and I'm saying all that to say how, because all kind of thoughts are going through my head while I'm there observing this. I'm saying, wow, so this is how a true man of the people really acts. I mean, this man can relate. He could relate to kings, presidents, okay, the high circles of society, and he can relate. He could relate and interact with the lowest of the low and
Yeah,
all in between. So
yeah.
that personal charisma, that carriage, that intellect, that heart that he had, okay. I mean, that example to me, that's something that I would take to my grave, okay. And I believe that I can say the same for all of those who witnessed that all around the country. Whoever had to work with him has seen that wasn't a one-off. This is the way he was, okay.
So Hina, before you jump in with a question, just for the listening audience, Brother Shabazz mentioned Belgrade, Florida, right? And
Belgrade, yes.
Belgrade, Florida. I had an opportunity to go there last Ramadan. We were serving food at the prison down there, and it was as if I walked into 1957. I couldn't believe it. Anyhow, Hina, jump in.
Yeah, I actually had a question, and I'm sorry that the Muslim Street is just dropping so many super profound and difficult questions, but we love the controversy. We want to discuss all the things that the Ummah isn't openly able to discuss, especially since we're independent Muslim journalism. The question that I had for you is one thing that I like to focus on in every episode that we have, whether I'm hosting it, Malik is hosting it, we're co-hosting it together. Whenever I bring on people or Malik brings on people, we talk a lot about uniting the Ummah. And when it comes to, Dr. Khalid, what are things that he taught you or taught us collectively that we could apply to uniting the Ummah? Because as we see globally right now, there's sanctions, there's genocide, there's oppression, there's, all sorts of financial, economic, political oppression all over the world. And I think Muslims are at like the focus point of that, or the focal point of that. And as a byproduct of this oppression, I think, there's been sort of this conquer and divide per se, where essentially different Muslim factions are working in accordance to their specific, the color of their skin, their ethnicity, the sect of Islam that they come from, their socioeconomic class, their political ideology. Uniting the Ummah is super important in order to overcome that oppression. So what is it, specifically about Dr. Khalid that we can all take as lessons to apply that to ourselves and to the Ummah? Because I think, in my personal opinion, that's one of the biggest things, one of the biggest game changers in overcoming the oppression that we're all going through.
Could I answer that, Brother Malik?
Yeah, that's yours.
That's mine. Okay. It's going to be kind of like a three-part, so I'm going to try to make it short because we have
Yeah, we got about 10
limited
minutes.
time.
Yeah.
One of Dr. Khalid's trademark quotes, I'm going to use the word quotes. This is what he would say, okay? Because was accused of going against, specifically of going against that goal, that noble goal, okay, of uniting the Ummah and not feeding the divisions, whether they be along color, class, caste, sectarian, etc. lines. So one of the signature quotes that anyone who's listened to him, he said, why do we teach so hard? Why do we focus on black, black, black? We're Muslim, right? And in Islam, we are not supposed to see color. But he said, I'm speaking to the reality of what is, not the ideal that we're moving toward, but I'm speaking to the reality of what is. Then he would say, no matter where you go in America, in the world, excuse me, no matter where you see, whether it's in Islam, whether it's in Christianity, whether it's in Judaism, whether it's capitalist, communist, socialist, whatever political or economic paradigm or system, what you always find, you'll find white people at the top, black people at the bottom. Okay, and he would go to the various, again, the various categories, whether it's a Muslim country, whether it's a Jewish country, whether it's capitalist, communist, the racial dynamic, as Dr. W.B. Du Bois would say, the problem of the 20th century is the problem of the color line. But it seems that white hegemony, regardless of what system, regardless of what year, regardless, we talked about the innovations earlier, and you see who is still holding the top position. So in order for there to be unity in the Ummah as a whole, we must address the issue of race and its consequences, its implications. Because there's a problem of white superiority, but there's also a problem of black inferiority. And those two mindsets have to be attacked simultaneously in order for there to be a true brotherhood and sisterhood and unity in the Ummah. Because the reality says that when we travel into various Muslim countries, and I've been blessed, like Brother Malik, to travel, and, you know, we're just conditioned in America to watch for certain things and be sensitive to certain things. And we just notice that at all times. So there's a lot of work to be done along that line. So Dr. Khalid was addressing that. And some would say, well, we should focus more, sister, like you were saying, on unifying the Ummah. You know, this is about unifying us under al-Islam on a global level. This is the only thing that's going to destroy that, yes, when it's carried into practice. But again, we have an issue. We have a peculiar situation with our people. When I say our people, here in North America, Black people, for example, in North America, the Caribbean, Latin America, and Africa. Okay. And we're coming out of it slowly and then more rapidly these days. But the seeds of Black inferiority were planted a long time ago. I mean, generations, centuries ago. And it takes a while for that, okay, to be purged out of our psyche, okay? Before we came online, you know, you were mentioning something, it was a little banter back and forth about why we like that. Why do we do certain things the way we do, okay? And there's a history, there's a cause to that. It's not how we are by nature, because history says otherwise. But in the last 6,000 years, this is the position we're in. So if we're going to walk together as brothers and sisters in this mighty Ummah that we are part of, and if we're going to stand in as a solid wall against our common enemies, then it's very important that the house, okay, be brought into there has to be an equality, okay, a leveling out, okay, and an internal reconciliation and an internal healing, an internal cleansing of all the vestiges of racism, classism, and caste systems inside the Ummah. And that's where Dr. Khalid, I believe, was very instrumental in doing that, because his unique approach in how he dealt with, I mean, this man has been to Mecca, what, 7 times? And been all over the Muslim world, and he had no problem. I mean, he had universal respect from the total Ummah, from regardless of color, regardless of nationality, regardless. But when it came to the work here in North America, our primary mission was to raise the Black man and woman of North America, because we were the lowest of the low. We had been brought down so low. I mean, a significant amount of us that were brought in here as slaves out of Africa, a significant amount of us were Muslim. They purged all of that out of us, okay? In addition to any African traditional beliefs we had. And they took every vestige of our being, robbed us of that. So to heal the people from that condition, I mean, it takes a powerful spiritual medicine. We say it takes the medicine that gives Muhammad. And the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, who is our spiritual father here in North America, through whom we learned, most of us first learned Islam here, gave it to us in a special way, okay? And when you listen to, say, the Honorable Elijah Muhammad's tapes, or Minister Malcolm X's tapes, or Minister Farrakhan, or Dr. Khalid, you'll understand that the way we do Islam here is remedial. It's like it's meant to effectuate a change, so that when, instead of taking us straight into Islam, al-Islam as it's practiced globally, these people, I mean, our people have been really, really, really messed up. We're twisted, inside out, upside down. We will come into Islam, and that work is not, that foundational work was not done. We will go into Islam with the same inferiority complex that we had in Christianity. So that had to be dealt with, cleansed of the dross of this world and the experience of slavery, so that when we stand in the ranks of Islam, we stand as equals, true equals, and not as beggars, and not as second, third, fourth, fifth class citizens in Islam. Okay, so that's, I mean, I can go on and on, but I hope I encapsulated that as
Yeah.
concisely
No,
as I could.
mashallah, that was a beautiful way to answer it. And to be candid, I think you were saying earlier, Ahina, I don't know if I'm answering the questions properly. There on the Muslim street, there is no right or wrong way to answer a question. There's a reason we brought you on as a guest speaker. There's certain pearls of wisdom that you have that, Brother Malik and I would not be able to share as profoundly. So no, thank you so much. I couldn't have worded it better myself. And thank you for
Welcome. Thank you,
teaching
sis.
our
It's been a
audience.
while. It's been a while since I've been on publicly speaking. I mean, I grew up. I was publicly speaking from 3 years old on, but it's been a while now, at least over 15 years since I've been out in the public speaking. So I'm a little rusty, but
yeah. As we close out the program today, we're running up on the hour. I got about 3 or 4 minutes left. The life of Dr. Khalid Muhammad, 53 years old, short, but a life worth living. You talked about Brother Shabazz 7 times to Mecca, whether it was Hajj or Umrah. We saw him at the pyramids lecturing. He was a scholar and academic. We also know that he was a warrior, right? He had that other component to scholarship that Garvey had, that Malcolm had. And that's that warrior, scholar, that Dr. Obata talks about in his organizing. And just to give you an anecdote, and everybody, like you said, everybody got a favorite story of Khalid. I'm going to give you one here. It's the summer of 1985. And Fruit of Islam would meet in Chicago at 7 o'clock in the morning on a Saturday. I got there about coming from far away. I got there about 20 minutes to 7. I pulled my little sports car up in front of the building, and Dr. Khalid runs out. The sun had came up probably an hour before, and he hops in the car. And I said, "What's going on?" He said to me, he got reports from the bodyguards at Minister Louis Farrakhan's house that it has been attacked. So he said, head over there right now. So I get to the first stoplight right there, and it's a red light. It's 7 o'clock in the morning on a Saturday in Chicago. He said, what are you doing stopping? he yelling at me, right? He said, don't stop until you get to the minister's house. I ran, and it's normally like about 25-minute trip, about 30 stoplights. He wouldn't let me stop. Ran every single last one of them. I'm trying to cruise. I got him over here yelling in my ear. Keep going, keep going, keep going. It's a panic going on. So we get there, right? He removed the bodyguards that were there, sent them back over to the building. We got a couple more brothers coming back over. I mean, this is straight up, the Corleone family. The war is on. I mean, that's the whole setting, man. I mean, it's hot. So we're standing out there, and up comes the Chicago Police Department. A couple of cars, all whites. They got this guy in the back seat. Half of his lip is hanging off, bleeding profusely. And he says, that's them right there. Khalid literally took control, called him a liar. The police are all out in front of the minister's house, Minister Farrakhan's house. He took total control of them. Within 15 minutes, they got back in their car as we close out the show, and I'm standing right there. And they apologized and said, well, be a little more careful next time. And they left. This is a Chicago Police Department with 9 millimeters cocked and ready to go. Khalid dialed them down and made them this small, right? That is the consciousness,
right,
blackness that came up out of unconsciousness.
That's
and when
right.
Oppressor sees consciousness, they turn off oppression.
Exactly.
That's a life worth living. That's Dr. Khalid Muhammad. This is the Muslim Street. I want to thank you, Brother Shabazz, on behalf of my host,
Thank
Hina.
you for inviting me, sir.
Our producer out of Ghana, The Last Scurv Show. We'll see you next week at www.themuslimstreet.com. And right here, same time, same station. Look forward to seeing you guys. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam.
Salam, everyone.